Hello, this is Ryan Riccitelli with asnews.net, and today I have Joe, the Godfather Bidawid, out of Detroit, Michigan on the line. Joe is one of the pioneers of basically the Great Lakes, and he's also a NASH rep up there and done a lot to grow the kiteboarding scene in that area. So, Joe, why don't you introduce yourself to everybody?
How you doing, Brother Ryan?
Good to hear from you, man.
Always.
Yes, for sure. Good to have you on asnews.net.
Well, the name is Joe Bidawid. I live in Detroit, Michigan, and I've lived here basically all my life. Grew up in Illinois, Chicago, Illinois, and went to university in Michigan. Moved out to the West Coast for quite a few years. Lived in the Gorge, and I've been back in Detroit since 1998, and coincided with the birth of kiteboarding here in the Great Lakes. And where I live in Detroit, we have really good conditions for kiteboarding. We have Lake St. Clair, which offers really good riding conditions, and as most people are aware, the Great Lakes, there's an abundance of beaches and great riding spots all over.
Well, you know, I've come up there, I think like five times now, and Joe has always been my host, and he's not kidding. I mean, the first time he invited me there, he told me there was waves on, you know, some of the lakes, and I've gone up there on several occasions, never really gotten lucky, but I know that Joe just sent me a photo that's going to be in my next magazine of him actually riding a pretty decent-sized day there. So tell us a little bit about that, Joe.
Well, the wave riding on the Great Lakes is a bit of a myth. Most people that live here that wave ride will tell you that the conditions are great. They're infrequent. We don't get them every day. They're usually associated with frontal winds, so when there's a strong weather system, typically we get some sort of wave. You have to be pretty dialed in on where to go and when to go, and if you're working, you pretty much have to drop everything and go. Most people here do that, and I've been pretty much on the, you know, all over, traveled the world, and lived on the West Coast, and the wave riding here can be really good. It's also very challenging. The conditions are tough. We have, typically when the swell is really good, we have really cold temperatures, and it's challenging. A lot of current, and it's typically really windy when the waves are up. So, but it's fun, man. It's a lot of fun. Anybody that rides here will tell you that it's a great time.
Well, Joe, you know, you're a really chill guy, and the people who do know you, they know that you're all about riding. You and I, we've traveled quite a bit together, gone on some kite adventures. You've written a lot of stories for me over the past, 5 or 6 years, and you've watched the evolution of kiteboarding kind of unfold in that area, and with that, you pioneered a lot of spots. And why don't you talk a little bit about the early days of kiteboarding in Michigan and kind of the reaction that you would get from people?
Well, I've talked to you about this before, Ryan. It's interesting how sometimes you end up at the right place at the right time, and I feel really fortunate to have been in a position to kind of get the sport of kiteboarding rolling here. When I came back from living in the Gorge, it was essentially not a lot of people had even heard of the sport. So that was really interesting. We had, as most people did back in that time, we had some heavy, I would term heavy experiences with trying to get going. We had some sketchy stuff that took place in the early days, and a lot of it had to do with figuring out where to ride and when to ride, and people had a tendency to gravitate toward inland lake riding. We figured out quickly that was not feasible, and also, generally I came from a windsurfing background and also surfing as well, and when you surf on the Great Lakes, it's usually pretty windy, and we sort of associated that, those conditions were good for kiteboarding, and sort of, lack of a better term, got our ass handed to us when we tried kiteboarding, in heavy winds, and until we figured out that we could ride in really light winds and found a comfort zone. It was pretty challenging, and we've since, it's pretty established now. There's really good riding spots everywhere. The first couple of years, we basically went around and tried every spot. I'd had pretty extensive knowledge. I've been riding on the Great Lakes for 20 years. Pretty extensive knowledge of all the riding spots, surfing and windsurfing, and we went off of that and came up, also pioneered some new spots, kite-specific only. So it's been really fun.
Like you're talking about pioneering spots, and what a lot of people don't realize is that the Great Lakes, it's a freshwater place, and a lot of people think that's like all polluted, and it's this dark, dreary, water or body of water, and what I learned real quickly up there is that the Great Lakes is incredibly beautiful. The water is actually in many areas crystal clear, and it's fresh water, and so it's a whole nother set of physics and dynamics, and then you're dealing with different types of winds up in the Midwest, and talk a little bit about that.
Well, we generally where I live in Detroit, I have 3 of the Great Lakes. Lake Huron is 1 hour east of where I live. Lake Erie is 1 hour south. Lake Michigan is 2 hours west, and I also live 10 minutes away from Lake St. Clair, which is 20 miles in diameter and a great kiteboarding lake. On any given day, there'll be some thermal wind activity somewhere, and if you're in tune, you can pretty much ride on a regular basis, regardless of whether there's weather or not. There's usually a lot of thermal activity. We have really good conditions. The water is amazing on the Great Lakes, and we also have the flip side, which is Lake St. Clair, which is an inner city lake. It's typically, it divides Detroit and Windsor, so it's essentially sandwiched between Detroit and the U.S. and the Canadian border. And we that was kind of a cool situation when I started, because I partnered up with Tim Blanchard, who's what I consider to be a Canadian kiteboarding legend. He's one of the early pioneers of kiteboarding in Canada, and also one of the first people to get certified as a kiteboard instructor in North America. And we worked together and pioneered a lot of the spots on Lake St. Clair. I had worked, I was trying to figure out the conditions at Metro, and worked, figured out what the best riding conditions would be. And on the same token, he was pioneering spots on the Canadian side. And at the same time, that was happening. We were doing the same on Lake Michigan, Lake Huron, Lake Erie, and it's just endless, Ryan. There's so many riding spots. And so it's been one adventure after another, and to this day, we still, that's one of the coolest things that keeps us going, especially the guys that have been around for a long time. There's always an adventure here if you have the time and the energy.
Well, and I remember an adventure that we had. It was you, me, and Adam Cook, and it was a Red Bull contest up there, and we flew into Detroit, and we were staying in downtown Motor City, and Joe Bidawid would come and pick us up in his black van with Nash on it, and we'd go chase for waves. And I remember we drove all over Michigan. We drove the length of it, we drove the width of it, and we were just searching. It was you, me, and Adam Cook driving in that van.
And Ryan, it's ironic what happened on that trip. Is kind of typical of what happens here for a kiteboarder. Today is Thursday. I've talked to probably 15 people already about what the weekend holds. I remember when you came, we had really good conditions for the first couple of days, and it was local. It was local riding, and the wind subsided. So then we went searching for wind. I remember we were thinking of heading east to Lake Huron. We ended up, I believe we ended up 2.5 hours west in Grand Haven, if I'm not mistaken, chasing wind.
I think that was the most fun part about the Midwest is you're sitting there with a group of guys and you know that they know the area very well. You're sitting with the boys and who know all the wind aviation models, everything you need to know of where to find wind, and they're like, "Hey man, we're charging to Lake Huron," and you're just like, "Cool." And I'm like used to like hanging out with guys who are like, "Yeah, we're gonna go charge Hokipa, or we're gonna go charge Lanes." And I remember me and Adam Cook, sitting there, and we're like, "There's gonna be waves on Lake Huron." So it's a whole nother dynamic up there, and I'm not trying to diminish it at all because there are some darn good riders up there. And you actually took me across the border, and we went and we had I forget what holiday it was like a 3-day weekend, and they literally had this barge, and Joe had arranged it with the whole local crew, and there had to been 15 people, and we drove this barge into the middle of Lake St. Clair, and we just had a photo shoot / barbecue / chill session out there. And talk a little bit about that.
Well, that was a great memory. If you talk to Tim Blanchard and a lot of the guys that took part that weekend, they'll tell you that was one of the most memorable weekends we've had as a kiteboarding experience here. And a lot of it had to do with you being here. A lot of it had to do with Adam Cook being here. And I think all the elements came together. It was late. It was summer here, late summer, so the conditions were good. The water was 72 degrees, 12, 14-meter conditions, powered up. On Lake St. Clair, the average depth of the lake is 8 feet, so we were riding in waist-deep water for miles. Tim Blanchard, who runs surfculturecanada.ca, owns and operates a kiteboarding school in Mitchell's Bay, Ontario, which is about an hour away from Detroit. It's a great riding spot. But he's also the owner of a 50-foot barge, which is amazing. It's a man-made wonder. And I believe we had over 20 people on the barge with gear.
Wait a minute, let me stop you. You had 20 Canadians completely provisioned to drink. Well, wait a minute, not Canadians. I guess I'm not a Canadian, but we had a lot of Canadians completely provisioned to drink.
That is true. We had quite the high population of Canadian riders there. We also had quite a few people from Detroit on the barge. Lots of fun and good times, and again, just good memories. I think we got on the barge at 10, and we got off the barge at sunset around 8 or 9 in the evening. And we were self-sufficient. We had a couple of jet skis for rescues. We had video, photos, food, drinks. It was amazing. And, that was a special experience, I think, for the most part. Again, if you're looking for an adventure, there's always something like that here. Last weekend, I rode on Lake Huron. We did a long downwinder, about 10 miles. They were calling for waves. There were no waves, which is pretty typical this time of year. We don't really get a lot of swell, but just the fact that you can ride 10 miles down the coast, perfectly sandy beaches everywhere. It's pretty peaceful, reminiscent of if you ever spent time on the West Coast. It's just a good feeling, good experience to be in those elements.
Well, let's switch gears here and talk a little bit about gear. A lot of our listeners, that's what they're really, concerned about is what's going on in the gear world. You're a Nash rep, so I'm sure we're going to hear the Nash rhetoric from you. But you also know their gear, better than most because you're out there selling it. Why don't you talk a little bit about the Shockwave?
We've had it's been a pretty popular kite here in my region in the Great Lakes. There's been a bit of a lot of people that dabble in wave riding. The little swell that we do get have kind of embraced it. It's also been a really good kite for people in general overall. I think what's happening recently here is that there is a high percentage of people purchasing bow kites in the Great Lakes, in this market. I think the Shockwave is pretty balanced wave kite. It steers really well, depowered. It's got really good bar pressure. I think for the most part, it does everything really well, and we've really haven't had any. Most of the feedback, has been tremendous. We've had some neutral feedback to people that come back, and it takes them a session or two to get used to it, or people that have had a long time riding sea kites, and those people, it takes them usually a session or two before they get comfortable on it. But essentially, it's been a great kite. I personally use a 12 and a 16. I've used my 12 conditions. I use my 12 quite a bit. The joke is it's always 12-meter Shockwave conditions. I've used it in this, from 12 knots up to 35 knots. And so it's been really good for riding in swell, and also it's been really good to see new riders enjoy the kite.
Well, and what are you seeing? Are you seeing more people? Are they gravitating towards the sea kite, or is everybody just all about the bow kite?
I think a lot of the entry-level market here, which is I believe there's tremendous growth here to be had in this region, and obviously most of it is going to be entry-level market. Most of those people have been gravitating toward the bow. When you show up to the beach here, you see a bunch of different brands, and a lot of people are having success on the bows, not just Shockwaves, but you see a bunch of different brands here. You see, all the bows that have done well this year. All the major brands have a presence here, and I think the entry-level market is doing, is enjoying the benefits of the SLE kite here. And it's a lot of it has to do with the fact that this is a strong recreational market where you have weekend warriors, people that get out once or twice a week, and when they get out, they want to be able to have that control and the stability and the depower. And there's also a bit of an old school sentiment here between some of the older riders that have been around for a while. They typically like to use the bow in the waves, but typically stick to the sea, doing freestyle and that sort of thing. I always compare the bow. I feel like it's sort of the longboard of surfing. It makes the sport accessible to a lot of people. But you're always going to have, I think you're always going to have again, for the lack of a better term, a purist segment where people are going to want the constant power of the sea as well. And it's nice not to distinguish, I think, in the kites. There's different kites for different conditions, but it's still kiteboarding, and I think it's fun. I've ridden sea kites. I personally ride sea kites 80% of the time. When I ride bow kites, I usually have a great time on a bow kite. So.
Well, you told it like a true Nash rep would tell it, man. I'm just giving you a hard time, but you know what? I have to wrap things up, but I have one question, and I know a lot of people are very curious to know, why do they call you the Godfather?
Well, it started off as a joke among friends, and again, it goes back to the being in the right place at the right time. I was one of the first people to not just to kiteboard, but to pioneer a lot of aspects of kiteboarding on the Great Lakes. And the only way you can do that is if you have good people around you. And there's tremendous people in all areas of the Great Lakes. Mark Kudrowski, Minnesota; Steve Kuhn, Wisconsin; Terry Krasinski, Mike Urban in Illinois; Vitas in Illinois; Tim Blanchard in Ontario; James Otis; Skip Schott; Brad Knoth, also in Michigan. And just a lot of great people around that we've been able to experiment and grow the sport here, and so that the nickname goes around I'm grateful for it. Again, a lot of people use it. It goes around, but I think it's kind of a fun thing. No one takes it seriously, and I'm just grateful for being able to have shared the early experiences with a lot of cool people, and I love kiteboarding, and so a good nickname is better than a bad nickname, I guess.
Where can more people learn more about you, Joe?
My office, which is the beach. I feel like it's good to be a local everywhere. So if you live in the Great Lakes and you show up to your beach, if it's windy, more than likely I'll be there.
And he will, too, because I've been with this guy, and his best pickup line in a bar is when a girl asks him what he does, he just tells him he's a beach bum. But anyway, we won't go there. But, hey, Joe, thanks for coming on the show, and I want to give you a chance to throw some shouts out to whoever you want to throw some shouts to, so here's your big chance.
Ryan, I'm stoked. Always great to talk to you. You're doing a great job with the magazine. I think a lot of people here enjoy reading your magazine. And shout out to all the boys and girls that are charging, riding hard, and more importantly, having fun, enjoying the sport. And everyone from Minnesota all the way to over to Buffalo, New York. And too many names to mention, but I think if you're out on the beach, having fun, sharing the stoke, that's what it's about. One love.
Well, man, and I think that's so cool because a lot of people don't realize what kind of a kiteboarding scene that you have there in the Midwest, and I've been there. I think that I've met a lot of the names that you mentioned in this podcast, and I really have a good time and a good feeling every time I come home from a trip up in that area, and I hope to get back up there soon. Thanks for coming on the show, and we'll be talking to you soon.
Thank you, brother. Always.
All right. Hello, this is Ryan Riccitelli with asnews.net, and today I have Jessie Hassell from Kite Adventures on the line, and she's out of New York. So, Jessie, why don't you introduce yourself to everybody?
Hello, I am Jessie Hassell, formerly Simon of Kite Adventures. We specialize in tours all around the world, and our premier tour destination this year was in Brazil in 2005. And next year we are going to start running tours throughout Asia, in Thailand and Vietnam, and also in Europe, in Sardinia and Greece, and Africa, South Africa, to follow that. And essentially what we do is we use all of the local guides and knowledge in creating a fantastic opportunity for people to kite along the most amazing destinations the world has to offer.
Well, and we've actually featured a few of these destinations in our latest magazines, the Kiteboarder magazines. We did your Brazil trip with Dimitri, and then in the one that's just about ready to release, we have a little 2-page feature on your Vietnam. And I mean, you guys are really quickly gaining popularity in the kiteboarding world, right?
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, we actually just started off saying, okay, let's just do a 6-month season, and then once we were there, we got contacted by a bunch of people who were just so into the idea and actually contacted us and said, why don't you just kind of explode elsewhere? So I've been working with a bunch of other people. Obviously, you can't do everything yourself. Doing this and traveling a ton. It's like when I get back from one place, I'm on to another. So what we really want to do is make this just a global business and for every kiter to enjoy, because we all know what it's like to chase the wind, and we just want to have a great time doing it. So we want to really focus in and zero in on those really high wind and great condition areas.
Well, and what's your background? How did you stumble upon this, niche of kiteboarding?
It's totally random, actually. I was in advertising and production, and I kind of always wanted more from my life, and I didn't want to work for the big man any longer. So we had a friend who was into kiteboarding for the past 5 years, who is now my partner, Alberto, and he has been in New York and Brazil trying to balance both lives, and finally, within the last year, he's like, you know what, let's just try to make this work. So it was kind of in the middle of nowhere, this whole thing came about, and once I started kiting, I really figured out what the whole rage was, and my love for travel has just always been something that I spend all my money on. So I figured, why not just make it a go of a business and combining a sport that just has so much spirit and enthusiasm in it.
Well, and so you're a kiter yourself, and how long have you been kiting?
I actually had my first water lesson this past August, but because the conditions are so amazing in Brazil, I probably had 50 solid days of kiting, and I would definitely consider myself a solid intermediate. It's really all about the wind and the conditions. I know people who have been struggling for 2 years, and I go out and they're like, you just started last, August, and you don't want to brag about it, but it's just amazing down in Brazil.
Well, and why don't you talk a little bit about Brazil, because I know that's one of your prime spots. Like, tell us a little bit about the area and the seasonality and, just like what people can expect from the trips.
Well, what's great about the area is you will have between 18 and 30 plus knots, no matter where you are. We start out in Fortaleza. We pick them up at the airport, and then we travel to Cambuco, which is also a very popular kite spot. A lot of Europeans are going down there now and buying up land just because the season is from July to January. You have nonstop wind literally every single day. So it's one of those things where people always ask, well, what do we do if there's no wind? And that has never in a million years, happened. Only towards the end of the season, sometimes they get skunked, in like January. But just this area from Cambuco to Paracuru all the way up to Jericoacoara, it's just unbelievable. 300 kilometers of beach, and you can kite anywhere along it. So there's no crowds. It's not like the typical cabaret scene. And people are it's just an unbelievable thing to think about when you realize you can just kite and go anywhere, and it's just pristine and it's beautiful, and there's just so much local culture and amazing things in this northeast part that I don't think people really understand until you actually get there.
Well, and what type of like accommodations are people staying in, like on one of your trips?
Well, what we really strive for when we did this was we wanted to make this a high-end, all-inclusive kiting vacation. So literally, like as soon as they walk off the plane, everything is taken care of for you, and we do that by putting you with a local guide. And in Brazil, Alberto is the man down there. And essentially, what we do is we have four-star hotels in Cambuco and in Jericoacoara that we put people up in, and it literally has everything: restaurant, massage, super nice, and so we're taking you along some great areas, and we're not skimping, obviously, on the accommodations. We also have a house that we just bought in Paracuru, which sleeps 10, so that's really another fun thing that we do. We have like parties and hammocks, and it's a 10-day party.
So, and what kind of rider is this geared for? If you're a flat stick beginner, can you go on this trip and learn how to kite, or is this more geared towards intermediates?
Well, what we wanted to do for Brazil, because it would just kind of hold up the idea of a tour, is our kiters, we like them to be getting up on the board. We've had someone come down who was, just barely going upwind, and by the end of it, he was jumping. So it's really an amazing thing to see these people progress. We also have a lot of advanced kiters, people who have been kiting for 5 years, who just came down and they were just blown away because of the conditions. So if you want to come down and you're a beginner, we have Thailand and Sardinia and Greece and Vietnam as well are going to be all for beginners. But Brazil, because of the nature of the spots and the areas we go to, we just kind of limit it to some kite experience.
Well, and what is the riding conditions? Is it flat water, waves? I've heard all different things down there. There's all the above. There's
everything. You can literally go kiting in waves and have an awesome session, and then walk across the sand, 10 feet into a flat water lagoon. So it's really incredible. You can go from waves to flat water, and downwinders are just spectacular in this area.
Well, and when you're down there, like, what size kites are you guys on?
I was on a 6 or an 8 most of the time I was there. The first time I flew a 10 or a 12 was in Hatteras, and that was kind of interesting. And guys are usually on 11 or 12s, but now with the bow kites, we're recommending, 9s for the guys and probably 6s, 7s for the girls.
So, you're like, what, 100 pounds, so...
I'm not allowed to tell that on the radio.
Yeah. Well, I think it's really cool that you're doing this. You've really opened up a whole new travel opportunity. There's a few people that are doing this, and it's just cool to see that you've opened up destinations that I know a lot of people have been wondering about. And before this interview, we were talking about Sardinia. You just got back from there, so tell me a little bit about that trip.
Oh, it was amazing. I had been to Italy before, and the idea of going to Sardinia was to set up Kite Adventures for next year. And the spots were just unbelievable. We went to 3 different spots. There's this one spot called Poeto, which is a little beach near Chia, which is it's the southernmost coast of Sardinia in a city called Cagliari. I know it's actually spelled Cagliari. So every time we asked about it, they had no idea what we were talking about because it totally sounds different. So anyway, this one beach was just amazing. There was probably like 20 kites lined up, and it was kind of mayhem trying to get everyone up at the same time. But once we were out there was just so much room and mountains, and the wind was just perfect, and it was just unbelievable. Just the water temperature, I was warned, was pretty cold, but we were there, and I was in a shorty, and I actually took it off just because it was just too hot for me. But we just had an amazing time there. And Kia is another beach that we went to, which was pretty cool as well. A lot of windsurfers, a lot of beach goers, so you have to kind of be careful. But what's great about it with the wind directions is as it changes wind, you can definitely go around Sardinia is an island, so you can go around the island and chase the wind to the right direction. So it was an amazing, amazing trip.
And what kind of kiting were you doing there? I mean, was it what size kites?
I was on my 8 for the most part, and I was on my 10 one day. But what's great is the locals are just so super nice. So if you need help or you need to borrow a kite or something, you don't have it, they'll totally help you out. It's really amazing. It's not really that European feel.
Jesse, I've seen you, and I'm sure that the Italian men were very happy to help you.
Well, maybe it was just me. I'm talking from personal experience.
And actually, if all of you who read the Kiteboarder magazine, we did a feature in our last issue, the one with Julie Simsar on the cover. We did a feature on Brazil, and actually, if you look in there, you will see Jessie in there, basically in her bathing suit, hanging out, and Dimitri's cruising by. So you can check out, she's definitely makes obviously good for the sport of kiteboarding, and you've influenced a lot of people to travel and actually get on the water. So I appreciate that. And where can people find more information about Kite Adventures and how to get involved with this?
Our website is newly finished, which has also been an amazing thing for us, just because I think it lends us a lot of credibility because you have all of the pictures of everything we do. So that is www.kiteadventures.com, just as it sounds.
You hear that? Kiteadventures.com. I checked it out, actually, and I would actually be looking at it right now, but it would mess up because the recording here, because it's got music going on it. So it's a cool site. Check it out. Also, I know you've been kiting for a while now, and you're like the perfect person to talk a little bit about gear with. And what gear are you riding?
Well, currently I have North Kites, and I just got a newly custom Jessie Hassell aggression kiteboard by GS. We worked together on that, and it came out unbelievably well, so I love that. And what I forgot to mention is I'm actually getting my pink Waru to match my pink kiteboard in a few weeks. What I forgot to mention, though, is we teamed up with Best Kiteboarding to run 4 Best-sponsored kite tours with Clinton Bolton, who's going to be a star rider on our trips this fall. So that's also something else to look forward to. We're really excited about that partnership because we know Alex and them are down there, and we got to meet them last year, so that was really, really a good thing for us as well.
Well, like I said, I just wanted to talk about gear, and I always put people on the spot because I like to pick everybody's brain about the gear that they're riding. So you talked about riding North Kites and, Best Kites. Now, the North Kites, obviously Ken Winter, he doesn't make a bow kite. So what kite are you riding over there?
I have a Vegas 2005, my green kite, which I absolutely love, my 8. I don't know what I would do without it.
So the 8, that's a Vegas?
Yep.
And, a lot of people speak highly of that kite, and you're in some pretty high winds. And, I mean, what do you think?
It handles really well. I mean, it's a sea kite, so of course, sometimes I handle some of the gusts. You don't get gusts in Brazil, so it's pretty amazing. But I just love the way it handles, and it's such a great kite, and you can really abuse it, and it just stays really functional, and just, I don't know, it's just when you find something that's yours and you kind of adapt yourself to it, and that's what I've done with my kites.
Well, and then what about the Waru? Have you spent any time on the Waru, which is
I haven't yet. Unfortunately, every time I go to test one, I'm running to another destination, or there's no wind here in New York and New Jersey area. So what I'm hoping to do is just get it and love it. But I've heard amazing things. I mean, you're on the forum. I'm sure you see it's like North versus Waru. So I figure why not? Let's just try it.
Well, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to put you on the spot like that, but it's that's where we get real feedback from people that isn't marketing rhetoric.
No, of course.
So and that's the thing is what Jessie said. She's flying a Waru, and she's going to be flying a Waru here, and she'll be also flying her 8 Vegas. So don't be so into just one brand. I mean, try different things out there, and I mean, you've been kiting a very short time, and it sounds like the Vegases have helped get you up and going. So, what's basically on your agenda next?
Well, I'm heading to Greece next month with Dimitri, and we have a kite tour happening. We have 6 kiters coming with us. That's going to be pretty amazing. I've never been to Greece, and from what I've heard as far as the islands, it's just unbelievably spectacular, and also with kiting. And if you know Dimitri, I'm sure it'll be a vacation to remember with his insanity. So what's next? Yeah, we have that, and we have a girls' tour with Laurel Eastman starting in October. We have a few more tours with Dimitri. We're actually going to be moving to the Bay Area in a few months at some point, and then back to Brazil. So next year is really going to be focusing on making all the locations work out well and fine-tuning everything. And our next spot, December, starts Thailand and Vietnam, and also snow kiting, so we're pretty psyched.
Well, you're definitely living the life, and I'm sure your trip to Greece will be fun. And if I know Dimitri as well as I think I do, I'm sure there'll be some pretty cool photos that come out of that. So,
absolutely.
Well, I want to give you a chance to throw some shouts out to whoever you need to do it, so here's your chance.
Well, I would obviously like to thank my hubby, David, who introduced me to the sport, and also Alberto, who, without him, we would not be here. I'd also like to thank Toby at Kite Forum and Kite Community, who really just allows people to just come out and write whatever they want to write, and without much bothering them. And I just want to I really appreciate what you and Marina are doing also, and just getting the word out. It's just such a wonderful sport, and it's so much fun to do, and it's just nice to be amongst people without the crazy backstabbing. So just want to thank you guys as well.
Well, thanks for coming on the show. It's been fun, and hopefully you'll check in with us sometime soon, and we can hear more about your adventures.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ryan.
All right, we'll talk to you soon.